After going to bed at night, you might have noticed a wonderful feeling of expansiveness or vastness that arises in the last few moments just before you drift off to sleep. You might also have experienced a similar feeling of expansiveness while listening to your favorite music and getting so absorbed that you somehow got lost in that music. And if you happen to be an experienced meditator, you probably know the expansive feeling that arises when you gradually lose awareness of your surroundings, then of your limbs, your body, your breath, and even the sense of being a meditator. These expansive experiences all have one important feature in common. They're produced by the temporary loss or dissolution of your ego, your sense of individuality, your feeling of being you, a particular person. To lose your ego is surprisingly enjoyable and even alluring. That's why we all love to slip away into the blissful silence of dreamless sleep, a state that's completely egoless. Because that egoless state is so pleasurable, some reckless adventurers seek it through the use of hallucinogens like LSD and magic mushrooms. They risk so-called bad trips and other undesirable consequences from using drugs that are illicit, unregulated, and potentially unsafe. Yet, they willingly accept those risks to enjoy the state of egolessness for just a few hours. Such is its allure. So, if temporarily losing your ego is so wonderful, then is its long-term loss or permanent destruction even better? Permanent loss of the ego is sometimes described as ego death. Some spiritual teachers say that you can achieve ego death through intense spiritual practice. They call it ahankara, nasha, destruction of the ego. It's not discussed in traditional texts on Advaita Vedanta, but in the Yoga Vasishtha and in other scriptures, ahankara nasha is widely praised, and it's often associated with mano nasha, destruction of the mind. These teachings can be easily misunderstood, especially when they're taken out of context. So, in this video, we'll explore the topic of ego death thoroughly from the perspective of Advaita Vedanta. Obviously, we are discussing ego here, not with the meaning of excessive pride or an exaggerated sense of self-importance, but rather in a much more fundamental way. As you might know, the word ego comes from the Latin pronoun I. In Sanskrit, the pronoun I is aham, and the word for ego is ahankara, which literally means the maker of I. That I is not the true self, Atma, it's the feeling of I-ness, the feeling or sense of individuality. And, like all feelings, it arises in your mind. For this reason, the ahankara is also called the I thought. Most mental activities, like thoughts, emotions, and perceptions, come and go throughout the day. But the ahankara is different. When you wake up in the morning, it's already present, and it usually persists throughout the day. That's why you feel like an individual person all day long, unless you happen to get lost in your favorite music or absorbed in meditation. Because the ahankara is almost constantly present in your mind, it's much harder to recognize distinctly compared to your constantly changing thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. That's why the I thought is best recognized not by its presence, but by its absence, like in the examples we've discussed. I've explained ahankara much more elaborately in an earlier video that you can watch using the link below. Now, consider this. Your thoughts, emotions, perceptions, and ego are all mental objects. When these objects arise in your mind, they become known to you. So you are the knower or experiencer of all those mental objects. You are the awareful witness or conscious observer of everything that arises in your mind. According to Advaita Vedanta, in essence, you are pure consciousness. The consciousness present in your experience right now. The consciousness that enables you to be aware of my image on the screen in front of you. Simply put, you are a conscious being, and consciousness is your essential nature, your true self, Atma. Whenever you use the word I, that pronoun really refers to your true self, pure consciousness. But when you meet someone for the first time, you don't introduce yourself by saying, I am pure consciousness, even though that's completely true. Instead, you say, I am so-and-so. I live in a certain place. I am a doctor, an engineer, or a homemaker. So instead of saying who you really are, you refer to yourself using a name given by your parents, a place where you just happen to live, and an occupation that fills your time. Yet, these details about you are actually incidental and even arbitrary. They don't refer to you in a fundamental way as a conscious being. It seems as though the pronoun I gets hijacked, so to speak. It gets redirected away from your true self, Atma, and towards all those incidental details about you. The culprit of this metaphoric hijacking is the ahankara, your ego. The ahankara associates you with your personal identity, an identity that includes your name, your address, your occupation, and millions of other facts about you. Your personal identity is like a lengthy autobiography that describes your entire life. Of course, that autobiography is not written on paper or on a computer. It's written in your memory, where it preserves a detailed record of all the events in your life, except for a few missing parts, like in early childhood. That autobiography is the basis for your personal identity. And it's not just deeply engraved in your memory, According to neuroscience, it's physically implanted in the neurons of your brain. Billions of neurons that are responsible for your long-term memory. Unfortunately, that autobiography says little or nothing about your true self, Atma, the pure consciousness that's your essential nature. As we just discussed, the ahankara figuratively hijacks your use of the pronoun I. By disassociating it from your true self, Atma, and associating it instead with your personal identity. This so-called hijacking is called false identification, and Advaita Vedanta considers it to be the root cause of all suffering. Let me explain. When you identify with your physical body and you get a headache, you naturally say, I have a headache. But the fact is, the pain actually belongs to your head and not to you, the conscious being, Atma. You are the knower of the pain. Pain is a perception that arises in your mind and is observed by you, the awareful witness. Yet, when you identify with your body, you wrongly conclude that the pain belongs to you. As a result, it robs you of contentment and makes you feel miserable. Pain is just a sensation, like warmth or coolness. On the other hand, feelings of discontentment and misery are not sensations. They're forms of suffering. It's often said that suffering is your response to pain. And it's possible to experience pain without all the suffering that usually accompanies it. Returning to our example, if you're not identified with your body, then the pain of a headache is just a sensation that can be managed with appropriate medication, while you remain completely free from suffering. My guru often said, Vedanta transforms problems into situations. That is, problems that threaten your well-being and make you suffer can be transformed into simple situations that you can handle pragmatically. More than that, with the help of Advaita Vedanta's teachings, you can engage yourself in a profound process of self-inquiry and undertake an inner journey that can eventually lead you to discover that your essential nature as pure consciousness remains utterly unaffected by the problems of your body, your mind, and the world around you. This discovery can free you from all suffering. But merely believing that your true nature remains utterly unaffected is not enough. Nor is it sufficient to simply understand that conceptually. Freedom from suffering is the result of the personal discovery of your true nature through a process of self-inquiry, a process that culminates in enlightenment. That momentous discovery leads to a life-changing transformation, and it adds a very special new chapter to the autobiography ingrained in your memory and implanted in your neurons. After discovering your true nature, your use of the pronoun I will no longer refer to the personal identity that's recorded in the prior chapters of that autobiography. Instead, the pronoun I will now refer to your true self, Atma. Yet a problem remains here. Our minds are highly habitual by nature, so it's unrealistic to think that identification with your body and mind that has persisted for decades will simply come to a stop in an instant. Like cows habitually return to their cowshed after grazing in the pasture, your I thought can habitually return to its prior association with your body, mind, and personal identity. This habitual identification is likely to remain even after you discover your true nature. To overcome that habitual identification, Advaita Vedanta prescribes a process of assimilation. The initial discovery of your true nature must be fully integrated, and integrated not just into your mind, but into your neurons as well. The practice of Vedantic contemplation, nididhyasana, is meant to help you assimilate your discovery and overcome any remaining habitual identification. With sufficient practice, your ahankara will become steadfastly associated with pure consciousness, Satchidananda Atma, unborn, uncreated, limitless, and utterly untouched by suffering. To understand this process of assimilation better, please watch my video on nididhyasana, linked below. You might wonder, after gaining enlightenment, what happens to all the other chapters of your autobiography, chapters recorded previously? Fortunately, they remain safely embedded in your mind and neurons, enabling you to introduce yourself appropriately when you meet someone new. Let's return to our earlier discussion about ego death. We can now fully explain why dissolution of the ego is so pleasurable. When the ahankara is present, you'll naturally identify yourself with your body and mind, and that leads to suffering due to the problems of your body and mind. On the other hand, when the ahankara is absent, that identification can't take place. So you'll remain free both from identification and from suffering. Of course, as soon as the ahankara returns, identification and suffering will resume. So, as we asked before, is the permanent destruction of your ego the ultimate solution to the problem of suffering? Unfortunately, that's not at all a viable solution. In the absence of your ego, like when you're absorbed in music or meditation, you can't do anything just then. For example, if your doorbell or phone rings, you'll either ignore it, or you'll have to leave that blissful state of absorption behind to answer the phone or doorbell. The fact is, your ego is crucial in organizing the activities of your body and mind. In its absence, you can't engage in any kind of intentional activity. Ego death can indeed bring an end to suffering, but at what cost? An old American joke describes a patient with a chronic headache coming to a doctor for treatment. The doctor shakes his head and says, "This is very serious. I'm afraid we'll have to amputate." On a much more somber note, you might have heard stories of enlightened saints who meditated in isolation without eating or drinking anything until their bodies finally died. I have no idea whether or not such stories are true, but if any of them are, perhaps ego death played a role in the physical deaths of those saints. It's not surprising that psychologists and psychiatrists consider loss of the ego to be a type of mental illness, a psychological disorder they call depersonalization. Fortunately, Advaita Vedanta's solution to the problem of suffering is not permanent, irrevocable ego death. Instead, the solution is to remove false identification with your body and mind. And that false identification comes to an end when you discover your true nature as pure consciousness. In other words, the solution to the problem of suffering is enlightenment. When you become enlightened, your ahankara will indeed continue to exist, allowing you to engage in normal activities. The ahankara is not destroyed by enlightenment, but instead it's radically and permanently transformed. It's changed in such a way that you will always identify with your true self rather than with your body and mind. For this reason, there is no need to constantly think or remind yourself, "I am pure consciousness. I am pure consciousness." Such reminders are completely unnecessary because whenever you use the pronoun I, it will automatically refer to the true self, Atma. An ego that's been transformed in this way is sometimes called an enlightened ego. Enlightened because it can only refer to pure consciousness, Atma, and never to your body, mind, or personal identity. Vedantic scholars often compare an enlightened ego to a burnt seed, a seed that can no longer germinate. When seeds are roasted, you can use them in cooking and eat them, but you can't plant those seeds. This metaphor shows that when you become enlightened, you will continue to experience the feeling of I-ness, the sense of individuality, the ahankara. But it will never sprout, so to speak, and develop into false identification and suffering. Enlightenment is not freedom from the feeling of I-ness. Enlightenment is freedom from suffering.